In the dim light of a rainy autumn evening, the city's underground pulsed with a hidden life few ever witnessed. The subway station, an austere, cavernous labyrinth of tiled walls, echoing footsteps, and the constant rumble of approaching trains, had long been a refuge for weary commuters and transient souls. On that fateful night, however, it became the stage for an event that would forever alter the lives of those entangled in its shadows. A solitary figure sat on a cold, cracked bench near the platform, his worn leather jacket pulled tight against the chill. Daniel Mercer was a man whose unassuming features belied a complexity of secrets and inner demons. By day, he had been an accountant at a small firm in the financial district. By night, he frequented the subway as a means of escape from a life that felt increasingly suffocating. No one had noticed the tremor in his hands, or the haunted look in his eyes, as he studied the grimy advertisements peeling from the walls. That night, as the train's headlights sliced through the darkness, Mercer's quiet vigil ended abruptly. A blood-curdling scream shattered the monotonous drone of the tracks. The sound ricocheted off the concrete, freezing the few remaining passengers in a tableau of shock and disbelief. Rushing toward the source of the cry, a cluster of commuters discovered a scene that would haunt them for years. A man lay sprawled on the platform, his face contorted in terror and his clothing stained darkly with blood. No weapon was in sight, and there were no signs of a struggle in the immediate vicinity. The victim was quickly identified as Eric Nolan, a local journalist known for his relentless investigations into corruption and organized crime. In the minutes that followed, police swarmed the station, their red and blue lights painting the wet walls in ominous hues as they cordoned off the area. Detective Lena Ortiz was among the first to arrive on the scene. With years of experience in the cold, unforgiving world of urban crime, she had learned to trust her instincts above all else. As she crouched beside Nolan's body, her keen eyes noted every detail: the peculiar angle of his outstretched arm, the pattern of blood droplets that suggested a precise calculated wound, and most curiously, a scrap of paper clutched tightly in his hand. The paper, smeared with ink and blood, bore a cryptic message: "In darkness, truth finds no refuge." Ortiz felt a chill run down her spine, certain that Nolan's death was more than a random act of violence. It was a deliberate silencing. In the hours that followed, the investigation unfolded like the layers of an onion. Forensic teams scoured the platform for evidence: latent fingerprints on the cold metal benches, stray fibers caught on a shattered piece of glass, and even a single shoe print that suggested the killer had been careful, almost ritualistic, in erasing his tracks. Meanwhile, Detective Ortiz interviewed shaken witnesses, a young woman who had been huddled in a corner, trembling, as she recalled seeing a shadowy figure retreat into a service tunnel. A homeless man who claimed to have heard hushed voices arguing in a low tone mere minutes before the murder. Every testimony added a fragment to the emerging mosaic of conspiracy and betrayal. As Ortiz began piecing together Nolan's last hours, she discovered that the intrepid journalist had been investigating a story that reached far deeper than local crime. Nolan's recent articles had hinted at a network of corruption that penetrated the very arteries of the city's transportation system. Anonymous sources had told him of kickbacks, forged contracts, and an organized crime syndicate that exploited the subway's intricate web to launder money and traffic illicit goods. In his final draft, left unfinished on his battered laptop, Nolan had written of a darkness that even the underground cannot contain. The implication was clear: Nolan's determination to expose the truth had placed him directly in the crosshairs of those who thrived in the city's shadows. As days turned into sleepless nights in her cramped office overlooking the rain-soaked streets, Detective Ortiz painstakingly reconstructed the timeline. Surveillance cameras positioned high in the station's corridors revealed fleeting glimpses of a man in a long dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, a silhouette that appeared in several frames near the scene of the murder. Despite the grainy quality of the footage, Ortiz's intuition insisted that this mysterious figure was more than a passerby. He moved with deliberate intent, as if guided by an inner purpose that remained shrouded in secrecy. Ortiz's investigation soon led her to a nondescript address on the fringes of the city, a dilapidated warehouse that served as an unofficial headquarters for an entity known only as the Collective. Rumors among subway workers and street vendors spoke of clandestine meetings held there, where individuals of dubious character exchanged information and money. The detective arranged for a covert visit, her heart pounding as she stepped into the cold metallic interior. Inside, beneath flickering fluorescent lights and the hum of ancient machinery, she discovered evidence that hinted at a connection between the collective and the corruption Nolan had been investigating. Stacks of ledgers, encrypted USB drives, and a map marked with several subway stations testified to a carefully orchestrated plan to siphon funds from transit contracts and funnel them into shadowy accounts overseas. Each piece of evidence deepened the mystery. One ledger, meticulously handwritten in a precise, almost obsessive script, detailed transfers that defied explanation, money routed through shell companies, then reappearing in bank accounts registered to names that were never heard of outside the murky world of organized crime. Ortiz noted that the ledger contained a recurring abbreviation, RT7. Unable to decipher its meaning immediately, she suspected it might be a code name for a particular transit project, or perhaps the initials of a key conspirator. The trail grew colder and yet more treacherous with every passing hour. A breakthrough came when Ortiz received an unexpected tip from an informant known only by the alias Raven. In a hushed phone call from a payphone in a quiet alley, the voice on the other end revealed that Eric Nolan had not been the only journalist probing into the corruption. Another reporter, who had been following similar leads, had mysteriously disappeared 2 months earlier. Raven insisted that the missing reporter, whose name was Adam Clark, had uncovered documents implicating high-ranking officials within the transit authority. Clark's last known whereabouts were linked to a disused platform deep within the subway system, an area so remote that even the hardened transit workers rarely ventured there. Ortiz, sensing a pattern of silenced investigations, decided to re-examine Clark's case, believing that his fate might be intertwined with Nolan's. Her renewed inquiry uncovered that Clark had been preparing to release a comprehensive report on bribery and kickbacks involving several board members of the city's transit agency. Interviews with Clark's colleagues revealed that he had been under constant surveillance and had received veiled threats in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. One anxious editor recalled that Clark had confided in him, "If I go public, there will be consequences. They have eyes everywhere, even where you least expect." Ortiz's determination to uncover the truth was fueled not only by the desire for justice for Nolan, but also by the growing realization that the corruption reached far beyond the confines of the subway system. As the investigation delved deeper, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The coded reference RT7 that had appeared in Nolan's notes and the ledger seemed to point to a specific transit route, a little-known express line that ran beneath the city's financial district. This route, seldom used by commuters, was known only to a few insiders and had been earmarked for a major infrastructure project years ago. Its funding had been mysteriously rerouted, and whispers in the corridors of power suggested that it had become a cash cow for those orchestrating the corruption. Ortiz theorized that both Nolan and Clark had stumbled upon RT7 as the linchpin of a grand scheme, a scheme that involved not only embezzlement from public funds, but also the laundering of money for an international syndicate. Determined to trace this elusive thread, Ortiz arranged a discreet meeting with a former transit employee named Samuel Ortiz, no relation. Samuel, now living a quiet life on the outskirts of the city, had once worked as a maintenance supervisor on the express line. In a modest, sparsely furnished apartment, he recounted with a tremor in his voice how he had noticed irregularities in the maintenance logs and unexplained shifts in the allocation of repair funds. "There were nights when I'd see men coming in and out of the control room at odd hours," he whispered. "They never carried proper IDs, and I always had the feeling that they were watching everything. I tried to raise my concerns, but no one listened." His testimony confirmed that there was something deeply amiss with RT7, something that extended far beyond the usual bureaucratic inefficiencies. Armed with Samuel's information, Detective Lena Ortiz secured a warrant to inspect the abandoned control room on the express line. Descending into the depths of the forgotten tunnel, she was met with a palpable silence broken only by the drip of water and the echo of her own footsteps. In the control room, dusty panels and outdated equipment bore silent witness to years of neglect and deliberate obfuscation. Yet tucked behind a row of rusted filing cabinets, she discovered a hidden safe. With the help of a locksmith, she managed to open it, revealing a trove of documents, blueprints of the transit network, confidential memos, and bank statements linking top officials to offshore accounts. Among these documents, a single file labeled RT7 Final Approval contained damning evidence that RT7 had been sanctioned under false pretenses, with its funds diverted to finance a covert operation. The file was signed by a man identified only by his initials, JK. The significance of those letters would later send shockwaves through the investigation. Back above ground, as the autumn rains subsided and the city attempted to return to normalcy, Detective Ortiz began connecting the disparate pieces of the puzzle. Eric Nolan's murder, Adam Clark's disappearance, the clandestine operations on RT7, and the coded signatures in the ledgers all converged to reveal a conspiracy that spanned the corridors of power in the transit authority and extended into international crime networks. The stakes were higher than anyone had imagined, and the more Ortiz uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became, not just for those seeking the truth, but for anyone who dared to stand in its way. A chilling new development arrived when an encrypted email landed in Ortiz's inbox. The message, unsigned and sent from a burner account, warned, "Stop digging, or the next name will be yours." The email was accompanied by an image, a blurred photograph of a man in a dark coat, his eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses. The unmistakable message was that the conspirators were aware of her investigation and were willing to escalate their tactics to silence her. Ortiz knew that she could no longer work in isolation. The network behind RT7 was powerful, and their reach extended into every corner of the city. Determined to counter the threat, Ortiz enlisted the help of a trusted cyber forensic specialist, Elena Morales. Together, they began tracking the origins of the burner email, cross-referencing IP addresses, and analyzing metadata from digital communications. The painstaking process yielded a breakthrough. The email had been sent from a location near one of the transit authority's lesser-known maintenance depots, a site that, according to Samuel's testimony, had been used by the collective for clandestine meetings. Ortiz arranged for a covert operation to surveil the depot, positioning plainclothes officers around the perimeter as dusk fell over the industrial complex. Under the cover of darkness, the depot became a hive of furtive activity. Shadows moved silently among stacks of discarded equipment, and the sound of whispered conversations drifted on the cool night air. Ortiz's team captured a grainy video of a meeting in progress. Several men, their faces partially obscured by hooded jackets, huddled around a table littered with documents and electronic devices. One of them held up a faded photograph, a group portrait taken years ago, featuring a young man with the initials JK. The man's eyes, though distant, burned with an intensity that spoke of ambition and ruthlessness. The revelation that JK was not only a signature on a damning document but also a central figure in the network sent shockwaves through Ortiz's team. The implications were staggering. Someone from within the upper echelons of the transit authority, or perhaps an external partner, had orchestrated a sophisticated scheme that cost innocent lives and funneled public money into criminal enterprises. With the surveillance footage in hand, Ortiz moved quickly to obtain arrest warrants. The operation that followed was swift and precise. Federal agents, armed with the weight of the evidence, raided the depot in the early hours of a chilly morning. Several individuals were taken into custody, and among them was a man identified as James Keller, a name that had long been whispered in the corridors of the transit authority as a fixer and intermediary. Keller's arrest confirmed what Ortiz had suspected, that the conspiracy ran deep, implicating individuals who had used their positions of power to safeguard illicit deals. During Keller's interrogation, his cool, evasive manner did little to mask the cracks in his alibi. Under mounting pressure and confronted with the evidence from the depot, he reluctantly confirmed that RT7 had been used as a front to siphon off millions in misappropriated funds. More disturbingly, he revealed that Eric Nolan's investigation had come dangerously close to exposing the scheme. Nolan was a persistent nuisance, Keller spat bitterly. He dug where he shouldn't have. We gave him chances to back off, but he wouldn't listen. In the end, he had to be silenced. Keller's confession, though partial and laced with attempts to shift blame, provided the final link that Detective Ortiz needed to piece together the full scope of the operation. As the investigation unraveled further, additional arrests followed. High-ranking officials within the transit authority found themselves caught in a tightening net of indictments. Board members who had long enjoyed unchallenged authority were forced to step down amid a wave of public outrage. The news media, once skeptical of Nolan's claims, now roared with indignation as the scandal unfolded. Headlines blared allegations of corruption, embezzlement, and the murder of a dedicated journalist whose pursuit of the truth had cost him his life. The city, already reeling from economic hardships and political strife, was plunged into a period of introspection and demands for accountability. Yet for Detective Lena Ortiz, the case was far from closed. Despite the monumental breakthroughs and the high-profile arrests, a lingering unease gnawed at her conscience. The identity of J.K. remained partially shrouded in mystery, and the encrypted files recovered from the depot hinted at a broader international network, one that reached into the corridors of art, finance, and government in ways that defied simple explanation. Ortiz spent long nights poring over documents, cross-referencing names, and tracing digital breadcrumbs. Every new connection deepened the labyrinth, revealing that the corruption was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a global web of deceit and exploitation. In one final twist that would send shockwaves through the community, Ortiz uncovered evidence that linked J.K. to a prominent public figure, a respected city councilor whose reputation for civic service had made him a local hero. The revelation was both stunning and deeply unsettling. The councilor, long admired for his philanthropic work and commitment to urban renewal, was now implicated in a scheme that defied the very ideals he had championed. Public trust, once taken for granted, shattered overnight as citizens struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the dark undercurrents of his secret life. The trial that ensued was a media sensation, an unflinching look at how power, money, and ambition could conspire to silence the truth. In a packed courtroom, with the city's gaze fixed on every word, the full extent of the conspiracy was laid bare. Testimonies from whistleblowers, former employees, and even members of organized crime painted a grim picture of a system rigged to protect its own. Detective Lena Ortiz, now both a celebrated hero and a reluctant guardian of painful truths, watched as the names of those responsible were recited one by one. The councilor's calm denial and tearful pleas of innocence clashed with the cold, methodical evidence presented by federal prosecutors. In the end, justice, though long in coming, prevailed. Convictions were handed down that reverberated far beyond the city limits. In the aftermath of the trial, as the city struggled to rebuild its shattered trust, Detective Ortiz found herself haunted by memories of the dark days beneath the streets. The underground corridors of the subway, once a symbol of daily routine and urban resilience, had been transformed into a crucible of human frailty and corruption. Every rumble of the trains overhead reminded her of the lives lost of Eric Nolan, of Adam Clark, and of the countless innocents caught in the crossfire of ambition and greed. Yet amidst the pain and disillusionment, there emerged a glimmer of hope, a renewed commitment by civic leaders to reform, to bring transparency to public institutions, and to ensure that the darkness that had once festered in the depths would never again claim so many lives. For Detective Lena Ortiz, the journey had changed her profoundly. In the quiet moments after long days of relentless pursuit, she would often walk the now quiet platform of the station where it all began. The echo of her footsteps, mingling with the distant roar of a train, served as a somber reminder that the fight for truth was never truly over. In her heart, she carried the memories of those who had given everything in the name of justice, and she vowed that their sacrifices would not be in vain. Over time, as the city slowly healed and new policies were implemented to safeguard public funds and reform the transit system, the case became a legend, a dark chapter in the annals of urban crime. Yet the legacy of corruption and betrayal lingered, a cautionary tale for future generations. In classrooms, in community meetings, and in the hushed conversations of everyday citizens, the story of Eric Nolan and the deadly secrets of RT7 was recounted with a mixture of sorrow and steely resolve. It became a symbol of the price paid when the powerful sought to silence truth, and a reminder that even in the most unremarkable places, a lonely subway platform, a hidden control room beneath the city, the seeds of injustice could take root and flourish. As years passed, Detective Ortiz's work continued to inspire a new generation of investigators, journalists, and activists. Though the scars of that tumultuous period never fully faded, they served as a constant beacon, urging society to remain vigilant and to demand accountability from those entrusted with power. The case had revealed not only the vulnerability of public institutions, but also the enduring strength of a community united in its pursuit of justice. In every small act of resistance, in every challenge to opaque authority, there was a spark of hope, an affirmation that even in darkness truth would eventually find its way to the light. And so, as the city moved forward into a future built on hard-won lessons and unyielding determination, the legacy of the underground conspiracy, and of the men and women who had risked everything to expose it, remained an enduring part of its collective memory. The subway, with its ceaseless flow of life and movement, continued to serve as both a vital artery and a solemn reminder that the hidden corners of our world, however dark they may seem, can never escape the unyielding pursuit of truth. In that pursuit, Detective Lena Ortiz's journey had come full circle, from the chilling discovery of a body on a rain-soaked platform to the dismantling of an international network of corruption that had infiltrated the city's core. Her story, interwoven with the lives of countless others, was a testament to the idea that even in a world rife with deceit, the relentless courage of those who dare to question can illuminate the darkest of secrets. And as long as there were voices willing to speak out against injustice, the memory of those lost would continue to guide the search for a better, more honest future. The Evergreen Public Library had long been a sanctuary of whispered pages and quiet reflection, a venerable brick building nestled in the heart of a bustling city, where the past and present met in silent harmony. On an overcast November evening, when the chill of early winter crept through the narrow streets and rain glistened on cobblestone sidewalks, the library's serene corridors became the unlikely stage for a horror that would shatter its calm facade. It began as many tragedies do, in the quiet hours just before closing. The library's grand reading room, with its towering shelves and soft lamplight, was nearly empty save for a few dedicated patrons and a handful of staff tidying up for the night. In one secluded section of the building, the Rare Books Archive, a dusty, almost forgotten wing separated by heavy oak doors and a labyrinth of narrow passageways, a young research assistant named Marisol Vega was arranging a newly acquired collection of manuscripts. As she carefully returned a leather-bound volume to its shelf, her eyes caught sight of something amiss, a book lying open on the table, its pages fluttering in a stray draft that shouldn't have been there. Setting the volume aside with a puzzled frown, she stepped closer, and froze. There, slumped against an ancient wooden desk beneath the dim glow of a solitary lamp, lay the lifeless body of Henry McAllister. Henry, the library's meticulous archivist, had been known for his quiet dedication and passion for preserving history. His eyes, wide open in a final moment of shock, stared blankly at the ornate ceiling. A deep gash marred his temple, and a smear of dark blood stained the aged carpet beneath him. Clutched in his hand was a scrap of paper scrawled with cryptic words, "Pages hide more than memories." Marisol's scream echoed down the deserted hallways, and within minutes, the silence was broken by the arrival of uniformed officers and forensic teams. Detective Aurora Bennett arrived at the scene with an air of steady determination honed over years of investigating crimes that rarely touched the polished veneer of public institutions. As she knelt beside Henry's body, every detail was catalogued: the precise angle of the wound, the careful placement of the note, the disarray of books and papers that suggested someone had hurriedly rifled through the archive. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle evident in the orderly stacks or in the meticulously maintained archives, a fact that immediately set her mind racing. This was no random act of violence, it was calculated, deliberate, and intended to send a message. In the following hours, as the library was cordoned off and forensic teams dusted for fingerprints on the brass doorknobs and polished surfaces, Detective Bennett began interviewing the few staff and patrons present that evening. Marisol, still trembling with shock, explained how she had discovered the body and noted that earlier in the day, Henry had seemed unusually preoccupied. He was checking old files and jotting down notes, muttering something about discrepancies in the acquisition records, Marisol recalled, her voice wavering. An elderly librarian, Mr. Geoffrey Lang, mentioned that Henry had asked him in hushed tones about some unusual entries in the library's financial ledgers, entries that did not match the records of donations and acquisitions the institution prided itself on. As Bennett delved into the case, she discovered that Henry McAllister had been a man of quiet integrity, deeply respected by his colleagues for his painstaking work in cataloging rare texts and manuscripts. Yet behind his gentle manner lay a restless curiosity. He had been secretly reviewing documents related to several recent high-value acquisitions. A pattern began to emerge, a trail of financial irregularities, forged signatures on provenance certificates, and inexplicable transfers of funds into offshore accounts. In the margins of his meticulously kept ledger, Henry had scribbled notes in a shorthand only he could decipher, hints of a conspiracy that might have jeopardized not only the library's reputation but also its very survival. Detective Bennett's investigation quickly expanded beyond the library's storied walls. Her team uncovered that a series of acquisitions over the past 2 years had been marked by irregularities, rare manuscripts purportedly donated by anonymous benefactors, volumes with questionable origins that had bypassed the rigorous standards usually applied by the institution, and invoices from vendors with shadowy names that hinted at offshore financial networks. One invoice in particular drew her attention, a payment made to an obscure firm registered in a tax haven, with the remittance memo reading simply "Eternal Legacy." Could it be that Henry's discoveries had threatened to expose a lucrative but illicit scheme? And if so, who stood to gain from silencing him forever? Bennett's early interviews revealed that not everyone in the library was as forthcoming as they appeared. While some staff members expressed shock and sorrow at Henry's death, others offered only vague, rehearsed statements. The library director, Evelyn Marston, maintained that the institution's operations were above reproach, though her tightly controlled words hinted at secrets best left unspoken. Marston's office was a study in opulence and restraint, a mahogany desk, heavy drapes, and carefully framed photographs of the library in its glory days. Yet, as Bennett later discovered, behind the polished surface lay a history of desperate financial measures, including questionable partnerships with private collectors and art dealers known for operating on the fringes of legality. Over the next several days, Bennett worked tirelessly to piece together the timeline of Henry's final hours. Surveillance footage from the archive corridor showed a solitary figure in a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, lingering near the restricted section just moments before the fatal discovery. The figure's face was obscured by shadow and the low angle of the camera, but Bennett's instincts told her this was no random wanderer. It was someone with a purpose, someone who had been there to intercept the truth. She cross-referenced the footage with digital logs from the library's entry system, narrowing down the window of opportunity to a 30-minute interval in the late afternoon. In the course of her investigation, Bennett uncovered Henry's private research notes, a tattered notebook filled with meticulous observations and coded references. Among the cryptic entries were repeated mentions of the Keeper, Legacy of Shadows, and a series of numbers that seemed to correspond to dates and locations within the city. One passage written in hurried scrawl read, "When the past is stolen, the future pays the price. I must secure the record before they erase it." It was as if Henry had sensed the danger closing in on him and had resolved to document everything, even at the cost of his own life. As Bennett followed the trail, she found herself drawn into a labyrinth of interconnected leads. The obscure firm Eternal Legacy, to which significant funds had been transferred, turned out to be a front for a network of private collectors and dealers who trafficked in stolen or forged historical documents and artifacts. Investigators discovered that several items in the library's recent acquisitions had been traced back to a notorious figure in the art world, a man known only as Victor Rourke, whose reputation for acquiring rare items by any means necessary was whispered about in high circles. Rourke, it emerged, had long maintained a covert relationship with certain members of the library's board of trustees, ensuring that a steady stream of exotic manuscripts and antiquities flowed into the institution, even if their true origins were murky at best. Bennett's relentless pursuit of the truth soon put her on a collision course with powerful interests determined to keep their secrets buried. Anonymous threats began arriving at her office. A single sheet of paper slid under her door with a message scrawled in jagged handwriting. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be revealed. A voice over a burner phone warned her that the investigation was interfering with matters best left in the shadows. Yet, bolstered by the memory of Henry's determined eyes and his final plea to secure the record, Bennett refused to relent. Every new discovery further solidified her belief that the library's corruption was part of a larger, more insidious network that spanned not only the cultural institutions of the city, but also international circles of criminal finance and art smuggling. In a daring move, Bennett arranged a discreet meeting with an insider, a former archivist, who had been forced to resign after raising concerns about the library's procurement practices. The man, known only as Sam, met her in a nondescript cafe on the outskirts of the city. Over bitter coffee and in hushed tones, he recounted how Henry had confided in him about irregularities in the acquisition files. Henry was obsessed with it, Sam whispered, his eyes darting around as if expecting to be overheard. He'd found discrepancies, forged signatures, documents that didn't add up. He told me he'd uncovered something big, a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. I tried to warn him, but by then it was too late. Sam's account lent a human face to the cold, hard financial records, transforming abstract numbers and coded entries into a story of greed and betrayal. As Bennett pressed on, she discovered that the trail led not only to the underbelly of art and antiquities, but also to the corridors of power within the city's municipal government. Several high-ranking officials, known for their support of cultural institutions, were revealed to have deep financial ties with the private collectors involved in the scheme. One official, whose name came up repeatedly in the encrypted documents Henry had left behind, was rumored to have facilitated expedited approvals and provided critical funding that allowed the library to purchase items without thorough verification of their origins. The implications were staggering. If the conspiracy were exposed, it would not only discredit the library but also topple prominent figures who had long enjoyed the protection of political patronage. A breakthrough finally came when Bennett's cyber forensics team managed to decrypt one of Henry's most cryptic entries. The string of numbers and letters, when cross-referenced with public records and historical archives, corresponded to an obscure manuscript known as the Chronicle of Shadows, a document said to detail secret alliances and betrayals from centuries past. In the wrong hands, such a manuscript could be used to manipulate public opinion or even rewrite historical narratives for personal gain. Henry had believed that this manuscript, along with his other findings, would expose not only a modern-day criminal network, but also a deliberate effort to rewrite history in favor of those in power. With mounting evidence in hand, Detective Bennett's investigation culminated in a high-stakes operation. In a coordinated raid, carried out in the early hours of a cold winter morning, federal agents and local police stormed a warehouse on the city's industrial fringe, a nondescript building that upon closer inspection served as a hub for the smuggling of forged manuscripts and stolen artifacts. Inside they discovered stacks of ledgers, digital storage devices containing hundreds of encrypted files, and even several copies of the Chronicle of Shadows. Among the arrested was a man identified as Victor Rourke, whose cool, defiant stare during the arrest did little to hide the gravity of his crimes. Rourke's capture sent shockwaves through both the criminal underworld and the upper echelons of the cultural establishment. In the interrogation room, Rourke offered a measured confession, though his tone was laced with both pride and menace. "The world isn't ready for the truth," he declared. "History is written by those who hold the power." Henry McAllister was a nuisance, a man who believed in ideals that have no place in the real world. When he got too close, we had to act. His words, chilling in their casual brutality, confirmed what Bennett had long suspected, that the murder of Henry McAllister was not merely a crime of passion or a rogue act, but a calculated measure to suppress information that could destabilize a carefully constructed facade of legitimacy. As the web of corruption unraveled further in courtrooms and through media exposés, the city was forced to confront a crisis of trust. The evergreen public library, once a revered beacon of knowledge, was now seen as a symbol of institutional decay, a monument to the collusion of private greed and public complacency. Testimonies during the trial painted a picture of a system in which historical artifacts were traded like commodities, and where integrity was sacrificed on the altar of profit. High-ranking municipal officials, library trustees, and even respected academics were implicated in a scandal that transcended simple theft or forgery. The revelation that those entrusted with preserving cultural heritage had been complicit in its exploitation ignited a firestorm of public outrage. Throughout it all, Detective Aurora Bennett remained the steadfast guardian of the truth, a beacon for those who believed that even the darkest secrets would eventually come to light. In the aftermath of the trial, as reforms were implemented and new oversight committees were established to audit cultural institutions, Bennett's thoughts often returned to Henry McAllister and the silent warnings he had left behind. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the library's vast halls lay empty and the whispers of the past seemed almost tangible, she would pause at the entrance of the rare books archive, the memory of that fateful night etched indelibly into her mind. The story of Henry McAllister's murder and the ensuing scandal became a rallying cry for transparency and accountability, inspiring investigative journalists, reform-minded politicians, and even citizens who had long harbored suspicions about the machinations behind their city's cultural institutions. The Chronicle of Shadows was eventually published in an abridged form, a testament to Henry's unyielding quest for truth, and a reminder that history, no matter how carefully curated, is always subject to the scrutiny of those brave enough to question it. In the months that followed, as the community struggled to rebuild its trust and the city undertook a painful process of introspection, the Evergreen Public Library underwent a transformation. New leadership vowed to honor the legacy of those who had fought for integrity, instituting rigorous standards for acquisitions and establishing an independent board of oversight. The once hidden ledgers and secret files were digitized and made accessible to researchers and the public, symbolizing a commitment to transparency that was as much a tribute to Henry McAllister as it was a promise for the future. Yet even as the institutional reforms took root, Detective Bennett knew that the scars of corruption ran deep. The encrypted files labeled Legacy and Requiem hinted at networks and conspiracies that extended beyond the library into international circles of art theft, money laundering, and the rewriting of history for personal gain. Though many of the key players were now behind bars or facing intense scrutiny, the full extent of the criminal enterprise remained shrouded in mystery, a reminder that the quest for truth was an unending battle against forces determined to remain hidden. In the quiet of her modest apartment, surrounded by case files and the soft hum of a late-night radio, Bennett would often reflect on the irony of her chosen path. In a world where knowledge was meant to be a liberator, it had instead become a weapon, a tool wielded by the powerful to shape narratives and control destiny. And yet, in the faces of those who had risked everything to preserve the truth, she saw hope. For every act of corruption uncovered, there were countless unsung heroes, archivists, journalists, and ordinary citizens whose courage had sparked change. Their sacrifices, interwoven with the pages of history, served as a beacon for future generations. As the city slowly emerged from the shadows of scandal, the legacy of the Evergreen Public Library took on a new meaning. It was no longer merely a repository of the past, but a living testament to the enduring power of truth. Visitors who came to marvel at the rare manuscripts and time-worn volumes now did so with an awareness of the cost at which such knowledge was preserved, a cost paid in blood, sacrifice, and the unyielding determination of those who refused to let the darkness prevail. For Detective Aurora Bennett, every case was a reminder that even in the most unassuming corners of our world, a quiet library, a forgotten archive, a dusty manuscript, the fight for justice was a relentless pursuit. And though the echoes of Henry McAllister's final moments would forever haunt the silent corridors of the Evergreen Public Library, they also lit a spark in the hearts of those committed to ensuring that truth, no matter how obscured by shadows, would eventually break through. In the end, the case became more than just a high-profile murder investigation or a scandal that rocked a revered institution. It became a symbol of resistance against the forces of corruption that seek to silence the past for their own gain. It was a story that reverberated through courtrooms, media headlines, and the hushed conversations of community meetings, a story that would be told for years to come as a cautionary tale and a call to vigilance. And as long as there were those willing to sift through the silent pages of history and confront the dark secrets hidden within, the legacy of Henry McAllister and the ideals he died protecting would live on, a perpetual reminder that even in darkness truth finds a way to be heard. In the small, affluent town of Rosewood, a place where manicured lawns and white picket fences masked a legacy of old money and older secrets, the unexpected shattering of a quiet night sent shockwaves through an otherwise pristine community. The victim was Richard Langford, a charismatic yet enigmatic real estate developer, known as much for his charm at charity galas as for the whispered rumors of underhanded business deals behind closed doors. His sprawling mansion, an opulent estate that overlooked the town's historic district, had long been the symbol of success and ambition. But on a chilly autumn evening, the mansion's grandeur would serve as the backdrop for a crime that would unravel a tangled web of betrayal, greed, and quiet revenge. It all began shortly after dusk, when the staff of the Langford estate discovered the unimaginable. Richard Langford lay motionless in his study, slumped in the high-backed leather chair where he had spent countless hours poring over contracts and proposals. The room was an elegant blend of polished mahogany and soft lamplight, filled with rows of leather-bound books and meticulous records of his financial ventures. Yet amid the order, there was chaos: scattered papers, a shattered crystal decanter on the Persian rug, and a single blood-stained envelope clutched in his grasp. The envelope contained a hastily scrawled note: "In every empire, the truth must be paid for." Detective Josephine Marlowe arrived at the scene just as the first raindrops began to fall, their patter on the mansion's leaded windows a mournful cadence to the evening's events. Known for her methodical approach and relentless pursuit of justice, Jo Marlowe had seen her share of high-profile cases, but the murder of Richard Langford struck a personal chord. He had been a fixture in Rosewood for decades, and his sudden violent end threatened to expose a hidden side of the town that many had long suspected existed beneath its polished veneer. Marlowe's initial survey of the study was meticulous. She noted the absence of any signs of forced entry. The heavy oak door had been left unlocked, as if Langford had always felt safe within these walls. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, aside from the disarray of documents and the shattered remnants of a glass decanter near his desk. The note in his hand hinted at something deeper, a motive rooted in betrayal or retribution. Marlowe's eyes lingered on a particular detail: a small, distinctive cufflink lying near the fireplace, its design identical to those favored by a select circle of influential men in Rosewood. It was a clue that would come to haunt the investigation. Over the next several days, Detective Marlowe delved into the life of Richard Langford. Interviews with his business partners, family members, and longtime employees painted a picture of a man whose public persona was at odds with the secrets he harbored. His ex-wife, Eleanor, described him as a man who always had a plan both in business and in life, but sometimes that plan left collateral damage. His closest associate, Charles Reed, a shrewd financier with a steely demeanor, admitted in a hushed tone that Langford had recently been exploring new territories for development, ventures that required risky partnerships, and possibly morally dubious arrangements. Even the mansion's longtime butler, Mr. Collins, recalled that in the weeks before his death, Langford had been more anxious than usual, often locking himself in his study late into the night, while murmuring to himself about keeping the truth hidden. As Marlowe gathered evidence, she discovered discrepancies in Langford's financial records that suggested vast sums of money had been siphoned off into shell companies and offshore accounts. A forensic accountant on her team uncovered irregular transactions linked to a mysterious entity known only as Evergreen Holdings, a name that did not appear in any of the public registries for legitimate businesses in Rosewood. The deeper Marlowe dug, the more she began to suspect that Langford's empire was built on more than just savvy real estate investments. It was supported by a clandestine network of illicit deals and secret alliances. Late one evening, while reviewing a series of encrypted emails recovered from Langford's office computer, she found a thread of correspondence between him and an unknown party. The emails were terse, livened with coded language and references to settling scores and protecting legacies. One message read, "If the truth emerges, our hands will be forced, be ready." The tone was chilling, and it confirmed what Marlowe had long suspected. Richard Langford had been entangled in dangerous liaisons that reached far beyond the confines of real estate. The investigation soon took an unexpected turn when Marlowe received an anonymous tip in the form of a handwritten letter, postmarked from a neighboring county. The letter claimed that Langford's murder was not an isolated act of violence but rather the final act in a long-standing feud, a vendetta that dated back to a business deal gone sour nearly 2 decades earlier. The letter detailed an alleged betrayal by a trusted confidant, a man who had once been Langford's right hand. Though the identity of this betrayer was obscured by pseudonyms and vague references, one detail stood out: the recurring mention of a particular cufflink, a detail that echoed the one found at the scene. The tip hinted that this individual, known in whispered conversations as Mr. Black, had orchestrated a series of schemes that had enriched himself at the expense of many, including Langford. Determined to verify the tip, Marlowe sought out individuals who had been close to Langford in his earlier years. In a quiet corner of a local diner, she met with a retired investment banker named Harold Simmons, whose gruff exterior belied a wealth of insider knowledge. Simmons recalled that in the early 1990s, Langford had embarked on an ambitious project to revitalize a derelict industrial park, a project that had attracted the attention of several powerful players. There was one man who made sure that Langford's dreams came at a price, Simmons confided in a low voice, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. They called him Mr. Black, not because of his appearance, but because he operated in the shadows. Langford trusted him, but in the end, that trust was his undoing. Simmons' testimony lent credence to the theory that Langford's murder was the culmination of a deep-seated grudge, one that had simmered for years beneath the surface of high-stakes business deals. Meanwhile, as Marlowe followed the financial trail, her cyber forensics team managed to decrypt additional emails from Evergreen Holdings. The decrypted files revealed that large sums of money had been funneled to accounts associated with notorious figures in the world of organized crime. One particularly damning document showed a payment made to an offshore account with a note that simply read, "For Mr. Black's silence." The chilling simplicity of the message sent a shiver down Marlowe's spine. It was clear that someone had not only orchestrated Langford's murder but had also ensured that any further inquiry would be met with ruthless efficiency. The case took on a personal urgency for Marlowe as she began receiving subtle warnings. Anonymous phone calls in the dead of night, with distorted voices cautioning her to stop digging and mind your own business, became a recurring feature of her routine. Yet driven by a steadfast belief in justice and the memory of Richard Langford's determined gaze, she pressed on. Each new piece of evidence, each encrypted file, every whispered recollection, formed a mosaic that painted a picture of a corrupt network spanning decades, from the heart of Rosewood's high society to the shadowy corridors of international finance. One breakthrough came when Marlowe discovered a connection between Evergreen Holdings and a prestigious private club in the city, a club frequented by the elite, where business deals were struck over glasses of aged scotch and the hum of discreet conversation. Undercover, she attended a gathering at the club, blending in with the well-dressed patrons and listening intently to fragments of conversation that hinted at illicit dealings. In a hushed exchange between two men in tailored suits, she overheard mention of a final adjustment to ensure that all liabilities were removed. The words resonated with the earlier tip about settling scores, and Marlowe sensed that she was closing in on the elusive Mr. Black. Back at her temporary office in an unmarked building near the outskirts of Rosewood, Marlowe painstakingly pieced together timelines cross-referencing financial records, personal testimonies, and intercepted communications. A pattern began to emerge over the past 20 years. A series of transactions and mysterious disappearances had coincided with major developments spearheaded by Langford and his contemporaries. The victims ranged from small-time contractors to high-ranking officials, anyone who had dared to question the legitimacy of the deals. Langford's murder, it appeared, was the latest, and perhaps the most brazen act in a long line of silencing tactics. As the investigation reached its crescendo, Marlowe's team managed to track down a crucial witness, a former personal assistant to Richard Langford named Olivia Hart. Olivia had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances shortly after Langford had begun to question the integrity of his inner circle. In a private, tense interview at a nondescript cafe, Olivia revealed that she had seen a figure in a dark suit. Her description matched the image of Mr. Black enter Langford's study on the night of the murder. I never thought much of it at the time, she confessed, her eyes haunted by the memory. But now I realize that he was the last person Langford trusted. When he found out what was really happening, he tried to confront him. That's when everything fell apart. Olivia's account, corroborated by other circumstantial evidence, provided the critical link that Marlowe had been seeking. In the days that followed, Detective Marlowe coordinated a high-stakes operation with federal agents to raid several properties linked to Evergreen Holdings. The raids were executed in the early hours of a foggy morning, when the streets of Rosewood were deserted and the veil of darkness lent an eerie cover to the proceedings. In a series of simultaneous sweeps, agents confiscated stacks of ledgers, digital storage devices containing encrypted files, and a trove of documents that detailed the clandestine operations of the network. Among the seized items was a dossier marked Mr. Black that contained photographs, bank records, and internal memos. The documents pointed unmistakably to one individual, Jonathan Blackwell, a man whose surname seemed almost too on the nose for the role he played in this elaborate scheme. Blackwell, it turned out, was once a trusted lieutenant in Langford's organization, a man who had risen quickly through the ranks, only to vanish from the public eye after a series of unexplained departures from his duties. Under intense interrogation, Jonathan Blackwell's stoic facade began to crumble. In a moment of guarded admission, he revealed that he had been entrusted with the management of certain sensitive transactions on behalf of Evergreen Holdings. I was just following orders, he insisted, his voice betraying a hint of remorse. Richard found out what was happening. He wanted to set things right, but when he confronted me, I panicked. I knew I couldn't let him jeopardize everything. His confession painted a chilling picture, a man caught between loyalty and self-preservation, whose decision to silence Langford had been driven by a desperate need to protect not only his own position but the vast network of corruption that spanned decades. As the trial unfolded in the high-ceilinged courtroom of Rosewood's Central Courthouse, the full extent of the conspiracy was laid bare for all to see. Testimonies from disgruntled former employees, forensic experts, and financial analysts wove together a narrative of greed, betrayal, and calculated violence. Richard Langford's murder was no isolated tragedy. It was the culmination of a systemic effort to hide illicit profits and secure the legacy of a corrupt empire. Public outcry was swift and fierce. The once revered image of Rosewood as a bastion of prosperity was tarnished overnight, and the names of those implicated in the scandal were splashed across headlines, igniting a firestorm of demands for accountability. Detective Josephine Marlowe, though lauded as a hero for her tenacity, remained haunted by the ghosts of the case. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, she often found herself revisiting the now silent halls of the Langford mansion, reflecting on the sacrifices made in the pursuit of truth. The evidence had been overwhelming, and convictions had been secured, yet the shadow of corruption lingered like an unwelcome specter, a reminder that the true cost of power is measured not only in wealth and influence, but in lives irrevocably shattered by deceit. In the months that followed, sweeping reforms were implemented across Rosewood's public and private sectors. Independent oversight committees were established to scrutinize large-scale developments and ensure that transparency would become the new norm. Evergreen Holdings was dismantled, its key players facing charges that stretched across state lines and international borders. The scandal prompted a wider investigation into the nexus between organized crime and high finance, a probe that led to further arrests and revelations of similar schemes in cities across the country. Yet for Detective Marlowe, the resolution of the case brought little comfort. The memory of Richard Langford's final moments, the desperate look in his eyes, the cryptic note that had foretold his fate, remained etched in her mind as both a cautionary tale and a call to vigilance. Every time she passed a grand mansion or encountered a seemingly unassailable figure in high society, she was reminded that behind the glittering facade of success, there could lie a dark undercurrent of exploitation and treachery. The legacy of the Langford case, with its twists of ambition and betrayal, became a touchstone for investigative journalists and reform-minded citizens alike. It spurred a generation of whistleblowers to come forward and expose the fragile interface between public trust and private greed. In local community meetings and televised interviews, citizens demanded that no one, regardless of status or wealth, be allowed to hide behind the veneer of respectability. The case was cited as a turning point, a moment when the truth, no matter how deeply buried, finally broke through the carefully constructed walls of silence. For years afterward, as the memory of Richard Langford's murder slowly receded into the annals of Rosewood's history, Detective Josephine Marlowe continued her work with a renewed commitment to justice. In her modest office, cluttered with case files and photographs of unsolved mysteries, she often found solace in the knowledge that every uncovered secret, every act of corruption brought to light, was a step toward a more honest society. And though the scars of that tumultuous period would never fully heal, they served as an enduring reminder that truth, no matter how hard it is to unearth, always has a way of emerging from the darkness. The story of Richard Langford's demise, with its labyrinthine twists and chilling revelations, was ultimately more than a single case. It was a mirror reflecting the eternal struggle between integrity and corruption. In a town that prided itself on its outward perfection, the murder had revealed a complex interplay of power, betrayal, and human frailty. And as Detective Marlowe's determined gaze swept over the familiar streets of Rosewood each morning, she carried with her the steadfast belief that every secret, no matter how carefully guarded, would eventually be exposed to the light. In the end, the case stood as a testament to the resilience of those who dared to confront injustice, a reminder that even when the foundations of a community seem unassailable, there are always hidden fissures waiting to be filled with the unyielding pursuit of truth. And for every soul lost to the relentless machinations of greed, there remained the promise that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail.